Hello and welcome to this interview with me, Harry, interviewing Bill Ottman. Bill is one of the co-founders of Minds, an alternative social media platform that utilizes open source code and blockchain, as well as Ethereum. Back in 2019, Bill spoke as part of a social media summit held by Donald Trump. So hello to you, Bill.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I think recently you've also teamed up with Daryl Davis, is that correct?
We have, yeah. Daryl and I went on Rogan's podcast the other week and talked about this paper that we just wrote called The Censorship Effect, which is 80 pages of peer-reviewed research. We teamed up with a handful of PhDs and some deradicalization experts and free speech enthusiasts and wrote this paper to essentially bring together the empirical data that censorship makes radicalization worse, that it's sort of clouded in all of these good intentions, but when you actually dive into the research, it is there are essentially no benefits long term.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've all probably recognized at this point. Everybody knows about how it's kind of an overused term at this point, but everybody knows about the echo chambers, and these are legitimate things. I understand that obviously censorship is possibly the biggest thing that you guys at Minds talk about, and is that purely on principle, or is it more to do with the de-radicalization element of opening up these ideas to the public?
Sure. I mean, I think I was chatting with Michael Malice a little bit, and he brought up, and we mentioned this in the beginning of the paper, that radicalization is not like good or bad necessarily. I think it typically there's a negative connotation around it, but there are plenty of things that you can get radical about that can be very healthy. So it's not, the goal isn't de-radicalization. I mean, the goal is better dialogue and discourse, but we're not out to, social engineer. So I want to kind of make that clear, that there's no agenda in terms of how we think people should think. However, I think we're trying to increase tolerance for having the hard conversations that are necessary and being tolerant of extreme speech, because we know that the only way for actual racist speech to change is to engage it. And that's what Daryl proves. Anyone who doesn't know, Daryl is a Black man who famously got over 200 members of the KKK to leave the KKK. And he did that how? Just by befriending them. Who would have thought that if you are nice to people and listen to them and engage them, that, they might listen to you?
Yeah, I agree. Daryl is kind of an inspiration for a lot of people in that sense, because he proves that if you can just talk to people, that you can change their minds, which obviously Minds being the primary focus of the of the platform. I'm aware that you guys started in 2011 and launched in 2015. Just for anybody who's not aware, would you mind giving us a quick run through of the journey up until now, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. I mean, early, we didn't really have much of a platform until 2015. So that was more R&D in those, formative years, and really ripping apart databases and kind of getting something that can actually scale. Then in 2015, we launched our first mobile app, and we had a large wave of growth in reaction to the Snowden revelations. There was all this activity around Anonymous. People were looking for more privacy-centric apps because, particularly because of the Snowden revelations, realizing that the NSA is, kind of hooked in to all of the major social networks. So that was an interesting growth wave, because it was, lots of liberals, progressives, conservatives. It was everybody, because that oddly, surveillance seems to be the issue that is cross spectrum in terms of, politically, people seem to agree that they don't want surveillance. The speech issue is obviously different, but you will find lots of people on both the left and the right, very upset about the surveillance. So then we kind of are moving into Trump's election, and then with Trump's election, speech, in my opinion, unfortunately starts to become politicized. Traditionally, I think, we all know that free speech is is not really a political issue. It's just sort of a general principle of, you know, Western democracy. And but then, you know, for better for worse, it did become political, and you know, we had all these free speech wars online. We're still in the midst of them, and we saw lots of growth kind of during that whole phase when the censorship really started expanding on big tech, and it has really reached proportions that I don't even know if any of us would expect. I remember when Carl first joined, and that it was more so around some hate speech stuff that, you know, a lot of people were getting banned. You know, whoever defines that, no one really knows. But now with all the misinformation, you know, the misinformation bucket of censorship is just so massive in encompassing of essentially anything that they want. And so, you know, our purpose with the paper in the research is to ground, you know, this argument about free speech and make it less emotional. You know, this shouldn't be like, look, we all agree that there's nasty stuff on the internet. That's not, you will not find a single person on the left or the right who thinks that there's not nasty content and, you know, crazy people that they don't want to engage with. But let's remove the emotion and understand what actually makes the internet a better place, what actually creates healthier communities long term. And that is free speech. That is proven historically, and it's proven in many, many studies.
Yeah, absolutely. And in regards to a lot of the, I mean, I would refer to it as so-called hate speech that gets bandied about, you guys at Minds, because of the fact that you care about privacy, you care about open discourse between people as a principle, have been accused by a number of media outlets, I was looking it up, in particular the people like Vice, of supporting hate speech and helping to propagate it. What comments do you have in response to those kinds of accusations?
You know, Vice is just something else. I've spoken with their reporters for hours, and they just, you know, it's what forces me to think that they're disingenuous, because, you know, I've explained this was pre-paper. And so hopefully now with the paper, I'm actually trying to talk to them again. Like, I like to talk to people who, you know, go around slandering us, because it's, you know, I'm not particularly bothered by it. I more feel embarrassed for them.
Yeah, I mean, if anything else, it's sticking by your own principles by saying, well, I disagree with all these people, I'm still having a chat with them.
Mischaracterization and straw manning is really like long-term embarrassing for the people who are doing it. And, you know, they're doing this on the record. So I feel like I want to, you know, I want them to learn how to steel man rather than straw man, and, you know, have more of a holistic view of this. But look, I mean, yeah, a handful of outlets have done that. And I think that they're scared. Look, people are scared of having hard conversations. And, you know, when you're dealing with content that is harsh and inflammatory and sort of exposing some of the uglier side of humanity, I mean, yeah, look, a lot of people don't want to deal with that. That is a hard truth to accept, that, you know, we do have these problems. And yeah, I actually wanted to run through, if you don't mind, just like in like a minute, just some like really interesting statistics that sort of have come out of the study.
Yeah, of course. Also, just for anybody watching who's not aware, where will they be able to find this paper?
Yeah, so you can find the paper at censorshipeffect.com. You can also find it at minds.com/change, where we have a number of videos as well, sort of explaining some of the research.
Great. Yeah, if you want to run through those statistics, I'm very interested to hear them.
Yeah, sure. So only 2% of extremists radicalize only online. About 70% of extremists radicalize alone prior to joining a group. Less than 17% of radicalization is primarily done online. Now, this is really important. This comes out of some of the work of Dr. Nafis Hamid. And, you know, there's all of this talk these days about how, you know, oh my gosh, the internet is radicalizing everybody, and, you know, be careful, bring in the censorship. But when you actually look at cognitively radicalized people and violent extremists, which are different categories, actually, it shows that this is actually largely an on-the-ground physical world issue where, people are meeting up in groups. A lot of people who are true violent extremists, they're not talking online as much. They know that they're being surveilled. They know that they need to do things offline more. So, I think that and actually of the 17% who are radicalized online, that segment is actually much less likely to escalate into violent extremism. So it's much more the offline sort of underground, like groups that are physically organizing who are escalating into violent extremism. That's very important for people to understand. It's not to say that the online stuff isn't worth looking at and isn't an issue. It certainly is. That's why we're doing what we're doing. But what this sort of says is that it's largely overblown. Social media is 10 times more important for Islamic extremists than far right extremists. This is coming out of UMD and from START, National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. So, that one is, the media is much more focused on the far right, obviously. But what we're seeing is that the Islamic terrorism, is 10 times more.
Especially over here, the Islamic terrorism is something that our media in particular really don't like to talk about as much as they should.
Exactly. And then the last one, which we did some specific novel research about, is that in terms of views, actually, when Alex Jones was banned, we did see an example of the Streisand effect where his overall viewership did increase. And so if their goal is to silence, it's not necessarily going to turn out that way when they censor. All of this attention from the media on various topics causes it to blow out of proportion. Now, the Streisand effect is complicated because it's not a universal rule that if something gets censored, it's going to get, that Streisand effect. That's kind of rare and more happens to popular figures. If you're just a random person with, barely any followers and you get banned for posting a study on COVID, it's likely that you are going to go down the memory hole. So it's not to say that that's universal.
Yeah, all of that information that you're referencing there all seems to be pointing towards a few conclusions that can be made, which is that most of these extreme viewpoints that are being pushed online, I think we all know, because I'm on Twitter. I spend far too much time on Twitter. I know that Minds has a Twitter account as well, and you do see lots of accounts posting lots of very horrible stuff, seemingly just to push people's buttons. And if that's being counted as radical viewpoints, the likelihood is those are probably just young teenagers trying to push buttons in the way that lots of kids do, or people who are potentially just LARPing, and in fact pushing them off the social media platforms is potentially giving them no voice, is potentially pushing them into those more on-the-ground sort of groups that you're referring to, where they're more likely to be actually pushed into a position where they could cause harm.
Exactly. Think of it as a social ventilation mechanism. There are actually starting to be studies done on shit posting, and I'm not even kidding.
Is this the Pepe's? The fact that Pepe is now a far right meme or something.
Well, there's those studies, but I'm more so saying the benefit of it.
Oh, really?
The benefit of enabling social ventilation to occur. Let people communicate. You cut off communication, and isolation. Social isolation is by far what is causing the most radicalization and potential, escalation to violent extremism. Think about school shooters. What's the trend? Well, obviously there's some of the SSRI stuff with the antidepressants, but you also have, these kids don't have communities. They have no friends. They're isolated. When you get isolated, you don't have access to communication, or, do some harmless trolling on the internet. Like if you don't, people, the communities that people get on online forums, like actually can be real friends for them and real outlets. And that can really be meaningful in people's lives. So when you take that away from them, I mean, look at the YouTube shooter. There was this woman, I forget her name off the top of my head, but she had a big YouTube channel. She did like dances and stuff. She got banned. She went into the YouTube headquarters with a gun and shot 2 people. This is a known event. Luckily, nobody died, and I'm obviously not blaming that on YouTube, but it is like, look, people have reactions when their voice gets shut down. We have to understand this.
Yeah, sadly, of course, that's one of those things where you don't point the finger at anybody, but there are causes and effects, actions and consequences. And when we're demonizing such a segment of the population and pushing them out of what many people would now refer to as the public square, I can understand how people can be put under a certain pressure that they may not be able to take, and some can snap. Once again, not blaming the people, not saying that anybody deserves to be shot, just that, like you say, there is a chain of events that lead to these sorts of situations.
Yeah, and it's so the term that is used for sort of the reinforcement of the ideas that happens after you get banned from somewhere is certainty. So when you are banned for, say, you're posting something, a COVID study that for some reason isn't allowed on Facebook, then you get banned from Facebook. Just think about that chain of events. Most likely your certainty level of if there may be some validity to that study is most likely heightened. Like why would you not be able to share a study created by doctors? It's just, it's like, what, like, where is the logic? And this is what is confusing, because I actually had a debate with a member of the Facebook Oversight Board through an organization called Tech Against Terrorism. She was actually oddly receptive to some of what I was saying, but I do not understand how the big tech companies are ignoring this information. They have huge teams, research teams. So I'm left to only speculate, but what we're trying to do actually with the paper and with our Change Minds project is to get them to actually respond to us and answer, look at this research. How are you justifying your censorship policies? Where is your data? Where is the research that you have that proves that censorship is at all being effective?
Yeah, that is a good point, because I certainly don't see Facebook or Twitter going into any in-depth research with scientists and behavioral scientists regarding the effects of their policies. And I think that's something good that you guys are trying to do.
And actually, they have done some studies, but what typically they will be measuring, for instance, there was one study done on Reddit where they analyzed hundreds of millions of posts. And okay, yes, if you ban certain words or you ban like the Trump subreddit, on Reddit, you are going to be able to limit certain conversation in an isolated network. But when you start to look at the internet more holistically, okay, well, where did that at the end of the so here's a beautiful example of Vice's disingenuity. They did a headline that said the Reddit censorship study proves that censorship works. That's Vice's headline. If you read the actual study, at the end of it, it says these users most certainly went into darker corners of the internet and got further radicalized. And Vice just completely ignored that and claimed that the study proves that censorship works. So it's just so ideological, and I'm tired of it. They target us. So, we're firing back, and I'm excited to see what they come up with. I literally want to see their research.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I wasn't aware of that particular Vice article. That is ridiculous. I hate the way that they do that sort of thing. It's the same way that I've covered before fact checking, because there's sort of a glut of fact checkers out there at the moment. And so many times what you'll find is they'll take the initial claim, twist it around, and then refute their straw man of the original claim that was made. And that's the same sort of thing that can be done with any sort of study, where you can take a study, you can take that tiny little bit of information that maybe lines up What it sounds like Vice did was say, well, what the censorship did is make sure that these people's views were not as much in the public eye, whereas that's not the same as actually fixing whatever problem produced those negative views in the first place, what the root of them were.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that that's where we're seeing sort of a fogging of what do we mean by does censorship work? Did we successfully hide the problem and push it under the rug? Okay, maybe in an isolated system. Yeah, sure, you can hide a problem from view, but are you causing it to rot under the surface and, then just like explode somewhere else? Like that's how we need to be thinking about this. And look, no journalist that is calling for deplatforming has ever achieved the heroic feat that someone like Daryl has done by befriending his enemies. These journalists they've never created any actual change in terms of change. Maybe not never, but on the scale of Daryl actually going into the storm and really showing people a different perspective, being mature and honest and open and showing compassion. No, it's just like the hate, honestly, the vibe coming from places like Vice, and this is, I'll say this is my opinion, but it feels much more hateful than the type of hate that they're accusing some of these places of.
Yeah, I could definitely agree that the place, you could call it spiritual position that a lot of these journalists are coming from is not from a place of they want redemption for those that they're calling out. They want the exact opposite. They want their complete destruction. They want to demolish these people. Where at the same time, if they did go and interact face to face, like you say, with the sorts of people that Daryl has spoken to face to face, these people probably wouldn't last a minute. These people would crumble and they would be weeping within seconds, just from, because I imagine Daryl, given the way that he seems in interviews and the fact, just his track record, I assume is a guy with very thick skin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
He has to be to do that sort of stuff. Whereas these people, they're made of paper mache. They're completely ridiculous in the fact that they think that just because they have this prestige of the mainstream appeal behind them means that they can go around doing and saying whatever they want without consequences is ridiculous.
Yeah, I've found that it is helpful to explain it to people in terms of mental illness. I'm not saying that all like dark comedy or like trolling on the internet is mental illness. Like obviously a lot of it is really funny and some of it's not funny and some of it is some of it actually is malicious. Clearly racists have some mental issues, but I think that when you invert the problem as opposed to as opposed to thinking of these people as like degenerates who need to be like removed from society, think of it more as a mental health issue. And extreme behavior on the internet, it's not just racism, it's not just misinformation. There's also a lot of extreme behavior in terms of depression and self-harm. For instance, there's one study on Tumblr that was analyzing a pro-anorexia community on Tumblr, where sort of this little forum and kind of scary.
I know
like
people who've definitely been involved in those sorts of spaces, and they're not healthy for those people involved. I'll tell you that.
No, absolutely not. But they found what they called it toothpaste tube effect, very similar to sort of whack-a-mole, where you ban it from the one community on Tumblr and then it pops up over here, and then they measure that the self-harm actually increases after they were banned. So all this, it's the same pattern over and over. And people can abuse social media. And I'm not sitting here saying that there's no room for, any consequences. And like, if people are extremely malicious and like that they shouldn't be able to be blocked or like put or given a strike in certain connotation. But our philosophy at Minds is like redemption wherever possible. And always like provide an appeal process and, be as human as you can be and stick to the First Amendment. And that's the best that you can do. I like to think that a team of lawyers at some Silicon Valley software company are going to come up with a content policy better than the First Amendment. I mean, like, how arrogant is that? Like,
Well, to be fair, we complain about it a lot here. It's this progressive ideal that's infested the majority of the Western world at the moment, which is that came before is old, is decrepit, it's useless. Who cares that the Constitution's been around for 250 years? And like you say, it's worked up until this point, so we know it works. We need to try all of these different things that we have no guarantees on, and which, in fact, when you actually do look into them, seem to have net negative effects. And then they just ignore that and say, well, it's new, it's shiny, that's what we need to do anyway. But in regards to the redemption aspect of it, so what, if any, regulation is there on Minds? I understand that you guys have a jury system for content that was implemented. Could you walk us through some of that, please?
Yeah, sure. So, we ultimately want to extend the jury even to the initial decision. So the way that it works now is we have a report flow. If you see, any threats or anything, like a general report tool, if something is not, is like for 18 plus, we have a report tool so that it can be flagged. So it can go behind a filter, if it's more explicit content, which we do allow because, explicit content, if you've seen The People versus Larry Flint, great movie about explicit content and kind of the history of pornography in the US. So we have that whole report flow. But currently, if we make a decision that a user disagrees with, they can appeal it, and then that will spawn a flash jury to 12 randomized active users to potentially overturn us. So we made that to sort of keep ourselves in check, make sure that our team can't make mistakes. I mean, we're not, error proof. And eventually we want to move it so that the jury is actually making the initial decision as well. And I'm hoping that we can roll that out this year. And not just for negative content, but for good content as well. And like really empowering the community I would much rather empower the community to help moderate the site than, kind of have that all on us. I think we need to kind of change the dynamic. The risk that we're very cognizant of is kind of mobs taking over the jury, which, there are ways to prevent against that because, it could go wrong, but at the same time, like we want to remove ourselves as the middleman in the conversation. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where, that like Dorsey and Zuckerberg find themselves in when like there's some censorship event.
Yeah, you don't want to be sat next to your lawyer on Joe Rogan being grilled by him and Tim Pool anytime soon.
No, exactly. So which was just an absolute,
Well, I think the interesting thing about that whole interview was that Dorsey, for the most part, seemed to capitulate quite a lot to what Tim Pool was saying. He was like, yeah, the censorship's not great. Yeah, I would do this if I could. Yeah, I kind of want this sort of dark version of Twitter where there is less regulation of what everybody's saying. But I think it is just because there's such a large corporation right now, because all of the staff are based in Silicon Valley, which all have their own certain ideals and everything, that even for a guy who was as powerful in the company as I imagine Jack Dorsey was, correct me if I've got that wrong, even his voice gets lost into the grind of the machinery that operates there,
I think that it is likely that he was not able to get his ideas through, but I also think when he left recently, so there's a new CEO at Twitter, Paraga, I forget his last name, and there's some very disturbing quotes that he has stated about free speech. Actually, I can read them.
I think I've seen a few of them that you're going to read out in a moment. I remember him not exactly seeming like, I don't know, the proud American patriot type.
I have it right here. He says, so it's Parag Agrawal. Our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment, but our role is to serve a healthy public conversation, and our moves are reflective of things that we believe lead to a healthier public conversation. the kinds of things that we do to work about this is to focus less on thinking about free speech, but thinking about how the times have changed. One of the changes that we see is speech is easy on the internet. Most people can speak, but our role, which is particularly emphasized, is who can be heard. Our role is to emphasize who can be heard. So it's that's pretty shocking. And this is how they rationalize what they've redefined what is healthy. They healthy society is something that traditionally is, like the USA would be considered a healthy society because it has these civil liberties. But now healthy conversation is they're redefining it so that there can be no bad words. There can be no conflict. There can be. So I'm curious your reaction to that.
Well, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you were saying there. I mean, I do find it very interesting that they, like you say, have redefined what healthy is, or at least they get to define what it is in a modern context. They've also positioned themselves as gatekeepers and arbiters of who gets to say what, because the interesting thing there as well is it's not like Twitter and Facebook are entirely free of hateful speech. You just find that it tends to be only ever allowed to be aimed in one direction. I don't know if you're aware of all the stuff that's come out in the past probably half a year of the way that Seth Rogen behaves on Twitter, for instance. He's been dropping into people's DMs, asking if they're Jewish. I don't know if it was fake or not. I kind of hope it's real.
Those are hilarious memes of Seth Rogen dropping into people's DMs.
Yeah, he just drops into people's DMs. He also threatened to drive to Hawaii so that he could fight... I've forgotten her name, the Democratic Hawaiian politician. Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah, he threatened to fight Tulsi Gabbard. Lots of ridiculous things. But there you can see that it's very much pointed in the direction of the progressives are allowed to be hateful to anybody who doesn't just completely agree and roll over for their ideal belief system that they already have. They've decided this is healthy, this is right, this is what people are allowed to say. As was pointed out on that Joe Rogan, Jack Dorsey interview where Tim Pool was consistently pointing out, well, your terms and services are very much directed in one way and are very censorious of more conservative beliefs.
Yeah, and Jack, so he left Twitter. He said that in his goodbye memo, said that he feels it in his gut that this is the best thing for Twitter. No criticism of anything at Twitter. So even if he, is secretly upset about the direction that Twitter has gone, and now that's why he's doing stuff with Bitcoin. I still don't respect the fact that he won't be public about his concern. He 2 days after he left, there was a huge new update to Twitter's terms of service where they can just ban any meme that has a private individual in it. So anyone who sees themselves in a meme that they don't like, they can just request to take it down. And it seems like things are only escalating. So, and then I don't know if you seen Elon Musk ranting the last few days about open source.
I was going to ask about that because I've seen you responding to some of his tweets. Yeah, what do you think about him sort of pushing out a dissident voice in such a high-profile manner on Twitter?
It's amazing. I mean, when I see richest man in the world posting about open source algorithms, I get warm and fuzzy inside. I've been talking about that for a decade. So that's pretty exciting. But then it's just funny because you see Dorsey respond to this and he says, oh, well, you really just need to give users control over the algorithm, which Twitter doesn't have. Okay, Twitter lets you toggle between a latest and an algorithmic feed, even though the algorithmic feed is the default feed, and they sort of bury the little switcher. And even still, the whole point of Elon's comments is that we don't know what your algorithm is doing in any case. We don't know what shadow banning is happening in the background. It needs to be open source in order to be at all trusted. So, it's just Dorsey avoiding the open source convo, not trying to take responsibility for the fact that they're not being transparent. And he just seems to do that all the time. So and then I've been also watching these Zuckerberg podcasts and throwing up a little bit in my mouth with Lex Fridman and then Tim Ferriss interviewed him as well recently. And Lex actually pushed back on the censorship, even though he didn't push too hard on like, what are you going to do about it, Mark? You know, I did respect Lex for, you know, explaining that he's gone overboard, but it's just like, I don't know. He's really entering the podcast circuit. I think a lot of these tech CEOs are realizing, okay, I need to start doing podcasts because this is the new media. They've been avoiding the public eye for so long, but they're just not talking about the core issues. Like, I liked Tim Ferriss, but it was just an hour and a half of talking about Zuckerberg's like routine at home and his personal life and his family and his values and, you know, Facebook's new core values, going through them one by one, not talking about any of the problems. So, you know, it's tough to see, like, 'cause, you know that everybody has some good and evil in them. Look, Zuckerberg's not entirely evil. He's a smart guy. There's, you know, he's probably a nice dad. Fine.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always think that the CEOs of these massive tech companies, the ones that have grown so large like Facebook and Twitter, Zuckerberg and Dorsey, they seem like nerds, tech nerds, who created this initial thing that they didn't expect to get any bigger than, for instance, in Zuckerberg's case, his college campus. And then it spiraled wildly out of his control and created this monster that he's just afraid to speak up about because of the fact that, you know, he's surrounded by all of this stuff. Although, to be fair, at the same time, it is probably somewhat his own values that are being pushed as well. This idea that, I need to have some form of regulation and control over what's said on this, just in case, even if I don't know if it works or not.
Yeah, it's a quandary. I mean, Zuckerberg gave a speech at Georgetown all about free expression, and you know, Lex asked about that as well, and it's just it's a gaslight, because he keeps, in interviews, he'll say he cares about free speech over and over again, but like, meanwhile, like, if you asked him, well, how many people have been banned from Facebook today for talking about, you know, X, Y, or Z? And it's just probably like millions of people have been like flagged or suspended like that day. And it's just this elephant in the room where they're acting like they care, but the policy is just so bonkers. So, you know, I do think Zuckerberg has more control in equity than, you know, Dorsey and some of these other CEOs have. Zuckerberg absolutely does have the power to change things. He's certainly afraid of the blowback of, you know, because he does have a mob, you know, telling him to censor more.
I mean, he's got parts of the US government prodding at his back, telling him he needs to censor more. I don't know if you saw Jen Psaki saying, we've been in communication with the social media companies about what we can do to curb misinformation.
Yeah, I would like to do a freedom of information request on those email communications. I've been working on that a little bit on the side. I mean, that was shocking. And yes, so they're getting pressure from every direction. But, you know, I've said this a lot. Like, it's just surprising to me that there isn't a big tech site, you know, with hundreds of millions of users, who is taking any sort of a more free speech and transparent philosophy, because they would win over a whole major segment of the market. I mean, they could, because that's why, you know, all of us alternatives are popping up. Like, there is demand for this. And it seems like odd to me that none of the power players, the ones who really have the ability to just, you know, they could tweak their policy and then suddenly they would be making a whole new demographic of people very happy. But, and I don't know, it's like you speculate, and is it ideological? Like, why wouldn't you have more of a First Amendment based policy? So who knows? But I honestly do want them to change. They're not just going to go away. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of them, they're not going to evaporate in the same way that MySpace did. they're embedded in our worlds on a completely different level than MySpace was. I mean, half of the websites on the world are using like login with Google, login with Facebook. It's like their APIs are just infected. They have infected the whole internet. And, even like, and again, I respect Rumble's free speech policy, but they're even using Google Analytics. So like everybody who visits Rumble Rumble is just giving all this user data to Google. Like we've taken much more of a hard stance in terms of the tools that we're even willing to use when we build our app. So we built our whole analytics system from the ground up so that we don't even know who, we have data, but we can't correlate it with individual users. So it's pseudonymous. And that took us like a year and a half to build, as opposed to, Rumble just like putting the Google Analytics script into their site, takes 5 seconds. You have amazing data, but guess what? So does Google. So we're really trying to push the message that to not take the shortcut. And but it's not easy. I mean, look, if you're a business trying to compete, people take shortcuts, but those shortcuts do impact the rest of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in regards to talking about the market solutions of competitors popping up and the idea that these companies aren't going to fade away, certainly at the moment, I don't see it. I don't know, going into the future, you've got Minds, you've got other companies like Getter and Gab popping up here. So there is becoming more of competition out there for these social media companies. So we'll see what happens in the future. But I definitely agree that for some reason, especially Twitter seems to be the big one that is very difficult to dislodge, despite how censorious they are. Back when I was at university doing a media degree, it was the one place that everybody told us, you need to be on Twitter. You need to be on Twitter because that's where all the journalists are. That's where all of the industry insiders are. It's become, as many have referred to it, as a public platform almost to a certain degree, just because of the access that you get to people that you never had before. 30 years ago, I couldn't tweet at my favorite video game developer and tell them that their latest video game sucked, whereas a platform like Twitter allows me to do that. But now if I do that on that same day, they might just swipe me off immediately.
Well, that is the nuance that I absolutely acknowledge about big tech. I mean, Twitter, YouTube, like these are brilliant platforms. I mean, their tech, their designers, they have engineers who are geniuses. Like they have thousands of them. They've attracted some of the best talent in the world, and they have built amazing tools. That doesn't mean that the infrastructure is not completely corrupt, both from a sense of surveillance and policy. So you kind of have like the surveillance like coming from the bottom up, the policy coming from the top down, and it's sort of like creating, it's making these what would otherwise be amazing technological achievements into these just sort of like dirty addiction systems. And I do think that they have the capacity to change. And, it's no coincidence that every app is becoming the same thing. Like, think about it. Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, they're all, it's a feed, it's a messenger, it's video, it's all and that to me is a consensus of humanity that, hey, look, like we like these tools. Like this is what works. This is the UX user experience that people like, that is efficient, that is viral. And but it just needs to be done in more of an ethical way. So but yeah, there are definitely market solutions happening. I mean, I don't know, like crypto is a big part of it, to be honest. I do think that, the philosophy of Bitcoin and Ethereum and a lot of these decentralized monetary systems are having a massive impact on the global infrastructure and financial system. And that is creating a whole new power dynamic globally. And, they are open source money. So we're seeing open source decentralized sort of take over every market. And it's just going to keep happening. So like, I'm very optimistic, even though things are continually getting crazier and crazier on big tech. I think that it's inevitable that, freedom-based systems are going to succeed. It's just like core human desire. And I think, freedom is viral. Even if big tech has, billions of dollars and thousands of developers, like it's going to be hard to catch up to them. But I do think that we will catch up. It's going to take, some more years, but I'm confident.
Yeah, well, in that case, what would you say are the main benefits of the approach that you guys at Minds are taking in regards to the open source encryption, and then especially with incorporating the cryptocurrency into it specifically? What would you say the main benefits for your platform of incorporating those elements are?
Yeah, I mean, take like a normal social media user, someone who has maybe like 500 followers. Like, if you on Minds, we actually reward tokens which you can trade for exposure. One token's worth 1,000 views. So you can use your tokens that you earn just for posting to boost your content, get more reach. It's the opposite of what big tech is doing. You could sit on Twitter for a decade and never get more than 600 followers because it's just a void. It doesn't matter if there's, millions, billions of users. Now, granted, I don't think everyone necessarily deserves to go like super viral. Not everyone has the most interesting things to say, but I think people should be given more of a chance. So the reason I say that is that it is more democratized, our system, in enabling people to get a voice. Like busting through the Twitter algorithm if you have no reach is very difficult. It's possible. And, people do it, but I think that's a major benefit. Look, we want to reward creators better than anyone else, and I think that long term, even big tech is realizing that the creator economy is absolutely essential. You need to reward users. The users are the lifeblood. There is no network without the users. And so whoever compensates and, gives the most reach and benefit to the creators, I think is who is going to win long term. And that's what we're trying to do.
I respect that. I like the user-focused approach that you guys are taking in that case, whereas with other tech companies, it seems to be much more of a perhaps algorithmically focused approach, or just boosting and promoting voices that, I don't know, certain elements of the management faculty seem to like. Oh, yeah, so previously, as I mentioned right at the beginning, you've spoken to, well, not, I don't necessarily know if it was directly to, but you were attending that social media summit that Donald Trump had back in 2019. What would you say has been, if you have an opinion on this, what would you say has been the difference in approach between President Trump and President Biden when it comes to the regards to social media? I know I have an opinion on it, but I'm interested to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. I don't think I've heard the words free speech out of Joe Biden's mouth.
Big surprise, so,
That's unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that, I mean, Trump got banned Twitter. I mean, I feel like that reality is, it's somehow drifted into the past and like still doesn't really necessarily get acknowledged enough on how big of a deal that is. That is such a shocking move. And I just think that, yeah, I mean, look, Trump is even starting his own platform, which I won't say I don't have issues with. He's behaving very strangely. What he did is he forked an open source platform called Mastodon. This is actually the same platform that Gab originally forked. It's an open source engine. And Trump is actually violating the license agreement of the open source, where he basically took free code, made his own thing, but the license says that he has to publish his code. But he had it up for a little, decided not to, and that's actually a violation of the license. So Mastodon's like not happy about that. But there's this interesting dynamic with when Gab forked Mastodon, many other Mastodon nodes actually blocked Gab because they didn't want Gab's content. It's sort of a federated protocol, so the posts can kind of go between the different nodes. And so I think Gab has since turned off the federation feature, and Trump Social turned off the federation feature too. But, Trump is just not, he hasn't even posted on his, I heard this, I haven't been on there to verify, but I think that he's so pissed at how the launch went that he hasn't even posted there at all.
Wait, there was sorry. Just to clarify, there was a launch. This is launched already.
Yeah, I don't know. It was
because if it has, rocky. I guess it really didn't go well.
Yeah. Well, look, he underestimated how hard it is to build a scalable system, but again, I wish anybody trying to build their own platform success. It's not easy to do, but abide by open source philosophy, because ultimately the market gravitation is going to demand the transparency from the network. So people keep things secret, sort of in this irrational old school fear, particularly in the tech industry. I'm not saying that there's not room for intellectual property. There certainly is. And that still exists here. But when you're dealing with apps that are interacting with people's data and affecting people's reach and visibility to the world, there has to be a new level of core transparency. I think that this is what Elon is realizing. He's ranting about discourse and the damage that Twitter and other platforms are doing to discourse with this secrecy, because we don't know why we're seeing what we're seeing. You refresh your feed and there was just all this AI, playing in the background, which then determined the next post that you're going to see, and also who is excluded from you being able to see. That's really the most important thing. Who's being punished behind the scenes, who hasn't been banned, but is sort of soft banned. That's very scary and dangerous stuff. That's the soft censorship. That's very dystopian in a way that, you're sort of tricked into thinking that you have a platform, but you really don't have a platform.
Yeah, I would go as far as saying that's that Chinese style censorship, the soft blocks where you can post and you think that it's going out there and just nobody cares, whereas in reality they're just being restricted from seeing what you have to say. Very scary stuff in the modern era, especially over here in Western countries. So what do you see as being the future of social media moving forwards, if you have a particularly clear vision of what that could look like?
I think what we're starting to hone in on is that interoperability is really crucial, and your identity and your assets and your content should really be sovereign to you. And so, whether you're talking about minds.com or, XYZ, other alternative social network, or big tech networks, at the end of the day, the ideal situation is you own and control all your stuff, and then you can kind of pop into whatever network you want, and your stuff is portable with you. So there are protocols and specifications for this decentralized identity system, and that's what we're really putting a lot of energy into right now. And it does relate to crypto, because crypto wallets are sort of this introductory proof of concept around, control of your assets. And there's a little bit of a learning curve, because you got this public address where people send you your crypto. And then you got your private key, which is what gives you access and control to it. But you are your own bank in that system. No one can take it from you as long as you're the only one with the private key. That is going to extend into identity, so that you can pop into these different networks and have total control over your stuff. And so, yeah, I really think that the next wave is not going to be like a singular company that wins. It's going to be protocols and decentralized specifications, so that users are really in total control of their stuff, and then they'll log into the networks that they want to participate in.
Well, that all sounds very interesting, and honestly, much more optimistic than I was expecting. How would you see that those sorts of developments affecting discourse in the future? Would you reckon that would provide a more positive discourse for everyone overall?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if there will still be, every network will still have its own policy, but users who are getting banned and whatnot will be much less affected, because when you get banned from YouTube, you had hundreds of thousands of followers, or however many followers, and it's just like, oh, I just spent a decade of my life building that audience, and now it's gone.
Even worse, your income might be reliant on your access to that platform.
Exactly. So, maintaining that sort of portable social graph, and like, so your subscriptions and subscribers are portable to you as well. Like that independence is really where we need to get. And, you brought up the Chinese social credit system. What that is a highly centralized dystopian system where they can just turn your funds on and off. They can turn your communication on and off. I do think that a decentralized identity system can still have components. I think achievements matter. So there's this spec called verifiable credentials that can be coupled with a decentralized identity, where you can earn certain badges or trust from other people, and you can have these badges / NFT type assets, which can potentially give you access to certain communities or certain privileges. Or say you're an expert in, I don't know, what did you study in school?
I did media studies. I did television and radio at university.
Okay. So, potentially universities could issue credentials, verifiable credentials on a blockchain, which can be correlated to your decentralized identity, so that, that when we're having these debates on social media, and rather than having like two fact-checking organizations that say, oh, this is true or this is not true, even though the debate is obviously still out, you would have much more knowledge about the people's credentials in the conversation, so that you don't need to censor it or not. You just say you're talking about, I don't know, climate change, and there's a post about climate change, and you have thousands of people participating. If you know that, like, hey, all these people have these credentials, who are saying this on this side of the debate, all of these people who have the other credentials or who have similar credentials have a different idea. You can visualize the debate so that the user who is seeing the content has much more of an ability to determine what is true for themselves, as opposed to Twitter saying, hey, this is true or false. With understanding who is saying what online, I do think is an important thing. The right to anonymity is very important. You don't want to force people to dox themselves. I totally agree with the right to anonymity, but like a lot of the with the misinformation debate, it's not that there is no such thing as misinformation, disinformation. There is sometimes, and sometimes it's malicious, but that doesn't mean that it should necessarily be banned. It means that we just want to know who we're dealing with, and if these people have been flagged by thousands of other users as being spam and abusive, or maybe they've been trusted by some super smart neuroscientists and they actually could have this portable credential. Do you see? It's a little bit complex, but do you see where I'm coming from with this?
I do see where you're coming from. I mean, the problem with the complexity of it is that the issues that have arisen as a result of social media are in themselves complex. So it can be very difficult to try and unravel that web and try and create something that's going to be more positive for everyone. But I agree with the principle of what you're talking about there, which is, greater transparency and the greater ability for people working on these social media platforms to be able to make up their own mind rather than being told from a single authoritative source that this is the truth. If you disagree with the truth, then sorry, son, you're going to have to go elsewhere because we don't accept anything else around here.
Yeah, I do constantly try to steelman the arguments, around misinformation. Like because I truly do think the only way we're going to have a social network that isn't just completely polarized between the left and the right is if we steelman their argument, find, okay, where is the grain of truth? Like, okay, you're concerned about misinformation. Okay, well, we have all this information that says that banning misinformation actually makes problems way worse. So can we agree to not ban it, but maybe there's a way with visualizing context on the post and with credentials for users, and just elevating peer-reviewed sources and whatnot on both sides, so that we're sort of acknowledging a component of their argument about certain content, but more so educating the end user as opposed to just banning it and getting rid of it.
just before we finish off, do you want to give one sales pitch for Minds for anyone who's watching who maybe hasn't signed up, who would be interested in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, supplement your social media. We're going cold turkey is not necessarily realistic, but I just encourage people, if they want to see a social network with freedom grow, then you have to participate a little bit. And so, check it out. The things that we give our energy to online are what grow. So it's not, even if it's small now, I mean, we are growing quite well, and so are many others in the space. But I think some people get disillusioned. Oh, it's just not nearly as big as Twitter. It's, every major network was where we are at one point, and even those quick 2-minute check-ins on a daily basis, or even a few times a week, make massive impact. Our energy and attention is what changes the whole network and power structure on the internet. So those little small amounts of energy really matter. So for what it's worth, yeah, come check me out. I'm at minds.com/Ottman. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Harry. It was a great conversation.
I know it's been great talking to you, Bill. It's been absolute pleasure. Once again, thank you very much for dealing with any issues that came about yesterday. By the way, I don't know what was going on with the calendar system there, so I don't know. But thank you very much for making the time to speak to us again today. It's been an absolute pleasure. This has been Bill Ottman from Minds. Thank you very much for checking out this interview, and have a great day.